Hey everybody, this is Randy with Carchaeology, and today I'm going to tell you a tale of the past. Now, I'm standing in the car room, which was my dad's man cave. It was my oldest brother's bedroom. When he moved out of the house, Pops took this over, hung up car pictures, the awards that his cars had won, some assorted parts, and pictures of all the neat collector cars that he had back in the day. If you look close here on the wall, you can see his Gullwing Mercedes right there. That was probably the coolest car the man ever owned. There's a 30s Packard right there. There's the 34 Packard right there that we bought back just recently. In any case, the garage is right below this bedroom, and there was always a variety of really interesting cars either in the garage or in the driveway as I grew up. But one car in particular that was perhaps one of the most amazing discoveries I've ever seen was something that I found in this neighborhood back when I was a little kid. So here in this driveway of my parents' home, that's kind of where I started my whole car career, is playing around there, both watching my dad play with the cars that he had, but then also my first cars. In fact, I had a spot here on the side of the house where I kind of turned that into my junkyard. I had my own little car projects going on there, and Dad would usually give me a little corner of the driveway to work on my stuff. But prior to the car stuff, obviously I started with bicycles and things, and I had a real good friend up the street that was also into bikes and variety of stuff. So I'd work on a bike and I'd hop on it and I'd ride up the sidewalk here to go up to his house. And one day I was riding my bike up the sidewalk and I came across a really interesting car that was in the backyard of one of the houses up here. Let me go up there and I'll show you where the car was. Now, I was always one of those kids that could tell what a car was from a mile away. It was just something that's always been within me. And I would ride my bike up this sidewalk here, and the other cars in the neighborhood were, well, they were just basic cars. However, we did have a neighbor over here. He had a 914 Porsche with a V8 in it. I remember that. There was a really cool old Volvo in this garage and driveway for a long time. But around the corner up here, on my way to my friend's house, there was one house in particular that one day I saw something really amazing. This house right here was owned by a gentleman named George. And I remember him being a real big guy. He was a little tough looking, fairly quiet, stayed to himself. But on the side of the house, next to where that big Sprinter van was, he had storage back in the backyard, kind of like that house there. And one day, as I was riding my bike up, George had the gate open. And I spied through the gate a car that looked pretty interesting, and I really didn't know quite what it was. It was blue, it was real sporty, it was kind of beat up as I recall. It had lettering and stuff on the sides of it that talked about races and things. Definitely an old race car at some point. Now I was probably, I don't know, 10 years old at this point. But growing up in a household that had a lot of cars like my dad did, you know, I knew enough that it was something special. And so I asked this guy, George, what kind of car it was. And he told me that it was a Cobra. And, well, I was only 10, but I knew what a Cobra was. I'd certainly seen those before and thought they were pretty cool. But this one was totally different. It had a much longer nose. It was a hard top. And it was definitely an old race car of some sort. So I said, a Cobra? And he said, yeah, it's called a Cobra Daytona. I went, okay, cool. And so I went up to my friend's house and we hung out for the afternoon. And then I came home in time for dinner. And when my dad walked through the door and got settled, I told him about it. I said, hey, Dad, up the street, there's a guy that has an old Cobra race car in his backyard. Now, like most dads, when they come home, they're pretty distracted. They're tired from their day of work. And I don't know if it really sunk into my old man's head what I had told him as a 10-year-old kid. Now, I saw the car again a couple times. Anytime the gate was open a crack, I would see it sitting up there. And I'm pretty sure I brought it up to my dad a couple more times at some point. But I really never, I don't think he really ever went up and talked to George about this car. Now, keep in mind, you know, we were the car guys in the neighborhood. There was always really interesting things sitting in the driveway. You know, my dad had a gullwing Mercedes, he had old Porsches, he had old 30s era classic American cars. There was always something really interesting sitting in the driveway here in Yorba Linda. But for some reason, my dad and neighbor George up the street never really connected. Now, I've told that story throughout my whole life about this Cobra sitting in the driveway up the street from my parents' house. And for many, many years, I think anytime I told the story, people didn't believe me. They said there's just no way. So who's going to believe me that there was one in the backyard up the street? Well, a number of years ago, the car surfaced in a nearby town to Yorba Linda here in a storage locker. And it was a real crazy story. The owner of the car had set herself on fire, and the car was left to her boyfriend, and it was just this really twisted, crazy tale. But the moment I saw a picture of it on the newspaper, I went, there it is, that's the car. And looking through the article, sure enough, I realized that George was this girl's dad. In any case, the story is well known at this point, who George was and how he got the car and the history of the car. His name is George Brand. He was a bodyguard for Phil Spector. Phil Spector had bought this car from the guy that owned, I think it was Heathkit or one of the slot car companies. Gosh, it wasn't Heathkit. In any case, one of you guys will pop up with it. And the car had a phenomenal history of racing on the salt flats and everything, and it was the lost Cobra. Now, that particular car now is in the Simeone Museum in New York. They have preserved the car, not restored it. They did take off the lettering that told about the race tales of the car, but it's still there, and someday I definitely want to go check it out. But that car, that exact car, was here in a backyard 5 houses up the road from my parents' house when I was a little kid. Definitely the craziest car that I've ever come across. And I, at the time, I really didn't know how important it was. But now I know. And it is probably one of the most important cars out there ever. Hard to believe that it was in the backyard of a car in Yorba Linda. But sure enough, it was. So that is my Cobra story. And right here on the bookshelf is the Cobra story. Thanks very much for watching. Please subscribe. Many more car tales and car stuff to come.